Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to talk about books, and specifically I want to talk about novels about books. And this isn't going to be a recommendations video or a wrap-up review type video. I want to talk more about the concept of books about books, what makes them so appealing to us, what makes them so appealing to authors, and just talk about some of the books about books that I have read and what I think about this story trope in general. The inspiration for this video came from a book I finished quite recently, and that is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. The 13th Tale is the story of a woman who works in her father's antique bookshop and is a hobby or amateur biographer on the side. And she gets a commission to write the biography of a still living but quite old, super famous author, a woman who has become the most popular writer of her time. So the main character, Margaret, travels up to this old lady's home and starts writing her biography. And within that life story, we get hints of other novels. Jane Eyre is a big plot device in a way. It gets mentioned several times. It pops up here and there, and the story of this author's life has many parallels to the story of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So this book, The 13th Tale, is a book about books in different ways. For one, it is a book about the love of books as an object, since the main character works in an antique bookshop and she knows how to restore old books. There is a lot of love for antique books in The 13th Tale. Secondly, it is a book about stories, because the way that this old author tells her life story is in itself constructed like a story. It sounds kind of obvious when I say it, but obviously our lives are not stories. Our lives don't follow a plot with a rising and a falling tension. Our lives don't have an introduction and an epilogue. And yet the way that a woman's life is presented to us in The 13th Tale is stylized and put into the narrative structure of a story. Thirdly, The 13th Tale is about books because the subject of the novel is an author. So obviously books play a big role in her life, and there is this kind of a MacGuffin type mystery. It is the hook that keeps us wanting to know more is a mysterious publication that this author is involved with, and there is a secret to find out about that as well. And then finally, it is a novel about books because of the way that tropes from classic fiction, specifically tropes from Victorian and tropes from Gothic fiction, keep popping up within this book. So it is a multi-layered delight for book lovers. As I was reading the book, I kept thinking about all of these different ways that Diane Setterfield managed to include what a book is about, because a book is so many different things. It is an object, it is a story, it is a profession, it is a collectible. It's got these different aspects and layers, so you can look at a book from so many different angles, and somehow she managed to include all of these aspects of books and reading and the love of books and the love of reading in The 13th Tale. So I was quite blown away by that aspect of the book, and I have read book reviews and I've seen book reviews of it that say that it is quite artificial, it is quite constructed. For example, the way that tropes from Jane Eyre keep popping up in this book. But I didn't mind the artifice because I appreciated it as art and as an aesthetic choice in itself. So anyway, that book, The 13th Tale, got me thinking about this concept of books in novels. Really, it is the most obvious thing to write about. It's like the old trope of having so many movies about Hollywood and about film production because that is what the people involved in film production know and care about and love. And I expect with books it's the same. Authors must love books. They must love reading, otherwise they wouldn't be in the profession they're in. Therefore, writing about books and reading must be quite an obvious, quite a natural choice. And similarly, readers love books, hence why we're readers. So the idea of having a book about a thing we love appeals to us naturally. One of my favourite novels about books is Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, and this is one that I've only read once so far, but that I am planning to reread in this year's Jane Austen July readathon. And what I love so much about this story is that the main character embodies us readers. And the historical and cultural context of Northanger Abbey, which was published in 1880, was very different to us reading it 200 years later, and yet we can identify with that love of books, with that love of reading that the main character, Catherine, brings with her. In the 21st century, if you are a young reader, you are generally speaking encouraged to read. It is seen as a positive hobby. And sure, we can probably all tell stories of our parents telling us to go outside. But by and large, we are encouraged to read as children. We are praised for it. We are gifted books. The hobby of reading is, generally speaking, one that is considered positive in the world, and specifically the reading of stories and the reading of novels. But when Northanger Abbey was published, shortly after Jane Austen's death, reading had a completely different connotation, and specifically the reading of novels. It wasn't encouraged. It was in a way seen as something slightly dangerous. Many educational texts of the time warn parents and teachers about the dangerous, destructive power of novels and discourage girls from reading novels, and it is specifically a gendered thing. It was really considered as something that is corrupting to girls. And Jane Austen takes that idea and subverts it and twists it around. Jane Austen is aware that she's writing a novel, so she's writing a medium that is seen with a little bit of suspicion, that isn't really considered high art, that isn't really considered something worthwhile, a worthwhile hobby, a positive hobby. She constructs this story around a teenage reader, a story that's funny and that takes tropes from popular literature at the time and twists them around and makes all of these ideas banal. Jane Austen takes the idea that novels are dangerous and corrupting and keep your daughter's hands off them and says actually they're harmless, while at the same time playing to the sensibilities of the time, because the main character in Northanger Abbey does get a little bit too seduced by the tropes in her novels. She does lose sight of reality just a little bit, but in the end it's not the novel's fault. It's not the story's fault that she interprets the surroundings around her through a lens of a reader. I think a really classic story about books that maybe you grew up with. I read it, I believe, as a teenager. I definitely did not read it as a smaller child. But a classic of the genre surely is Matilda by Roald Dahl. The story of a little girl who, unlike all of us, wasn't encouraged to read. She was forced to watch television with her parents, and then she discovers the power of stories. And quite literally, stories give her a superpower. And Matilda, I guess, makes the children who read it feel like they too are absorbing a superpower, like they too are special because they love books. And I'm no parent, so I'm not going to argue about the pedagogical value of Matilda and whether it is a great idea to tell children that they are special and better than other children just because they like books. Maybe some parents can weigh in on that. But it certainly is another way of turning the love of reading into a story metaphor that makes sense for the book. I want to mention a book that I did grow up with, unlike Matilda by Roald Dahl, and that was Inkheart by Cornelia Funke. I read it in the original German with the title Tintenherz. And it's a whole trilogy, and similar to The 13th Tale, it looks at books as objects and a story at the same time, but it goes further than that. It looks at books as worlds, as universes, as places, as settings, and it is the most magical story of a girl whose father is a bookbinder and who has a mysterious past that is somehow involved with a particular storybook. And as the story progresses, the storybook quite literally comes to life. And not only does the plot of the story come to life, the characters come to life, but also there is a whole other world that opens up to the main character. And as we get deeper and deeper into the trilogy, the two worlds, the real world and the book world, become more and more intertwined. I loved that. I haven't reread these books since I was, I don't know, maybe 13 or 14. I strongly feel like they are due a reread because I can imagine that today I will get just as sucked into this magical world of fairy tales and literature, as well as books that have, broadly speaking, books as a subject and books as metaphor, and talk about books. There is also that whole other subcategory of the story within a story. And the story within a story we get in many, many different iterations. For example, Wuthering Heights, which I'm not going to repeat my thoughts about, but Wuthering Heights is a classic story within a story. But in this case, it is an oral story. So we get told the story of someone who gets told a story. So you have a story within a story, but without the additional aspect of a book. But there are novels where the story within a story structure also includes the book. For example, The Princess Bride is one such story. We often forget that The Princess Bride isn't just this kind of fairy tale parody, but it is a fairy tale parody that is book-ended, that has a beginning and an end that specifically mark that story as a book, as an object that exists in the framework of the novel. I couldn't do this video without mentioning another classic German example of the story within a story, but at the same time book about a book masterpiece, that is The Never-Ending Story, or in its German original title, Die unendliche Geschichte. This almost contains all of the things that I have spoken about. It contains the topic of books as objects, but it also contains the topic of reading as self-expression. We have reading as an escape, and we have a really irresistible merging of life and storytelling. In The Never-Ending Story, we start off with our protagonist, a young boy who ends up quite literally lost inside of a fantasy story, and the way it is written with alternating chapters and by the end become the same story is just truly amazing. One of the best examples of this trope. It is essentially a good long love letter to storytelling and the power of story. And honestly, most of the books that I've read that are books about books are love letters. They are written with a tenderness, they are written with a passion for reading that almost is like a secret understanding between the author and the reader, because the author loves books, that's why they write books, and the reader loves books, that's why we read books, and we have the shared understanding that books are amazing. And that is why, in conclusion, I bloody love this trope. I love it. And I'm not saying that every single book about a book that I've read I have loved, for example, and this might be a bit of a controversial one because I know that this is loved by many, but The Book Thief by Markus Zusak, I am not a fan of. I really enjoy Markus Zusak's other novel that I've read, I Am the Messenger, but I just didn't get on with The Book Thief. but it also has that same shared love and passion for reading and for books and for the power of books, both as objects and as concepts. I want to open this up to discussion in the comments because I'm sure there are many more amazing books about books. And one of the amazing things about this trope is that it can be translated into pretty much any genre. I have not read a murder mystery thriller about books, but I'm sure they exist. I'm sure there are romance novels about books. I am sure there are satirical novels about books. I am sure there is amazing horror fiction about books. So put your recommendations in the comments and your philosophical essays about why you love books about books, or controversially, why you hate books about books. Maybe there's one of you out there. If so, I want to hear from you. Thank you for watching. Bye.